So, welcome back to the MSc Sustainability students, and a warm welcome to those from the EMBA consortium who are also joining us this evening, and to wider members of the Cranfield Sustainability Network speaker series joining us online. Welcome to you, give you a wave. Thank you very much for joining us this evening for this evening's keynote speech from Neil Jeffery. I'm really conscious that because this course has been an apprenticeship for many years, sometimes we get overly focused on what's happening on the UK and Europe and ignore the role of some of the biggest and fastest growing cities in how we're shaping sustainability globally. So I really wanted to invite a speaker here today who has real world hands-on experience of trying to build and deliver sustainable solutions in some of the world's fastest growing cities in Africa and also in Asia, and talk about what works and what doesn't work in trying to do that, but also really crucially, what we can learn in Europe and UK from some of the work that's being done to enable some of the biggest, fastest growing cities across the globe to grow in a way that's sustainable for people and the environment. So Neil Jeffery has got that real practical experience, having spent a decade leading water and sanitation for urban populations, which is a non-profit company that builds and scales sustainable sanitation and water solutions across the globe, and also now as CEO of Earth Active. So Neil's very kindly going to share some war stories of the time he spent trying to implement and scale those solutions, talking about the interplay between communities, regulation, technology, and how they can contribute to either success or challenges that need to be learned from and overcome. So I'm really excited to welcome Neil here. And it's great timing for me because I'm about to take on a role as a non-executive director on the board of What's Up, which is the organisation that Neil once led. So I'm really interested from a personal perspective to hear what you've got to say. So thank you so much for coming to join us tonight. And please be keeping questions in your head as Neil talks, because we will be opening up to questions at the end, and really keen to hear your questions and your perspectives. So thank you very much again. Over to you.
Great.
Thank you.
Perfect. Evening, everybody. It's very nice to be here. Thank you, everyone, for attending this. So as Rosina said, my name is Neil Jeffery, and I'm here to talk about building sustainable businesses in emerging market cities. This is really going to be very much from a practical perspective, so things that have worked and things that have not worked. The drive for all of the businesses and organizations that I've read was to seek to achieve change at scale. So we're going to be looking at things that have been managed to reach the hundreds of thousands and the millions in terms of trying to advance economic development, but also sustainable economic development in these challenging and complex environments. So just a little bit about me. So I worked in emerging markets for around 20 years. I lived through a whole period of time in Latin America, worked in the US on Capitol Hill, but on issues related to emerging markets. And then I've led a whole series of businesses that have had teams in Africa and Asia. And then I'm presently the chief exec of Earth Active. So we work on major infrastructure projects in emerging markets, alongside lenders, assisting those projects to reach international standards so that major investment can be unlocked. And typically the ticket size of my present company is around $500 million up to something like 15 billion in terms of investment. So quite a significant shift from what I was doing previously, but actually there's a lot of issues that then play out in terms of both. So in terms of you, so I understand there's a whole series of you on the MSc. It was very interesting to listen to your experiences and your enthusiasm. And there are the Commonwealth Distance Learning Scholars who are here in the room. So welcome. And part of the idea of me trying to share some of my experiences that hopefully it will resonate and be helpful, particularly for you. So in terms of the countries that you're from, I know all of them pretty well, and then led businesses in Kenya, Zambia, and Mozambique. whoever is from Cameroon. I don't know where you are in the room.
They're online.
Oh, they're online. Well, apologies, I don't really
I'm
know.
online. Hello.
Okay, well, welcome. It's
Thank you.
delightful to have you here. Sorry, I have much less experience in terms of Cameroon than the other markets. So all of these cities are of significant importance in terms of global growth. And hopefully when you go through your careers after being on this MSc and indeed being on the MBA, you will be able to utilize the experience and the knowledge in terms of the dynamics in those cities to assist you, not only if you're going to be working specifically in Africa and Asia, but obviously also if you're working in then UK cities, because increasingly you will have supply chains who will then be working and the issues will be more relevant. And as international standards are increased and strengthened, then of course that becomes even more relevant. So in terms of fastest growing cities, so they, as I say, they have a significant role in terms of shaping future economic development. You can see that global power is shifting. African and Asian cities will be more important over the decades. And in terms of urbanization, by 2050, we expect 68% of the population to live in urban areas, an increase of 2.5 billion, and most of this will be in African and Asian cities. And it's really important to recognize that as people arrive in these cities, typically the planning and the systems don't exist to prepare areas for them. So enormous areas of cities are created. There is no planning in terms of transport, in terms of water services, in terms of housing, and the cities are constantly trying to play catch up. So the role that I was playing at WASUP was to seek to assist those cities and the utilities that worked in those cities to be able to respond to those areas where effectively there were no services and there wasn't a planning a capacity to respond to them. To give you a sense of the scale of the period of the time that I was at WASUP, which was a decade, we went from 3 million to 30 million customers embedded into African and Asian utilities. So that number of individuals who were then receiving water and sanitation as a result of the work who previously didn't have access to services. So as I say, this surge in urbanization means that there is a necessity to respond to this population, to respond to all the services that they would want to consume, and to do it in a sustainable way, such that we will be able to have financial but also environmental sustainability. And I think it's really important to recognize that megacities clearly will have a huge influence on the globe in the future, but there are secondary cities that are equally as important, and there will be tens, if not hundreds, of these secondary cities that will be 3, 4, 5 million people across Africa and Asia, and service provision is critically important. So I've named a few there that we worked in. I was lucky enough to work in Visakhapatnam, which is on the Indian Ocean coast in India. It's one of the fastest growing cities in India, and we overhauled all of the public sanitation facilities and managed to get the city from 34th in ranking in India all the way up to 30th. And I can tell you the Indian authorities were very happy with that. But also we managed to do some good stuff for the people who lived there. Okay, so then in terms of opportunities and challenges, obviously, this does mean you've got a very significantly growing middle class, particularly in India, but also in many African economies. They have an ability to buy services. So, of course, businesses have the opportunity to respond to them. You can also see how innovation is shaping the nature of this. So many of the businesses that we started up were seeking to use new innovative technologies such as mobile payments or mobile banking. And even during the period that I worked, the number of poor people who were able to access mobile payments, to utilize mobile phones to make small payments, radically changed in the 10 years that I was there. And it had a huge influence on business models. So you're seeing smart cities growing, and then the cultural and then the diplomatic importance of cities is also growing. Nairobi, I think there's 3 new UN agencies who will be arriving in Nairobi over the next couple of years, and it's really a regional hub now for international organizations. And then Belém obviously will be the site of the COP in Brazil this year. But all of this needs to be then weighed up against the challenges that these cities face. So infrastructure strain, the challenge of informal settlements, as I was saying, that grow up because so many people are arriving, poor planning and inequality. And then we have all of the global challenges that lay over that. So climate change, change in sea levels, heat waves, and then the specific issue that I was working on, which is water. Obviously, climate change is impacting water, but population growth is impacting water, but also then increasing expectations and demand for water. So the UN think that by 2030, the demand for fresh water will exceed supply by 40%. This means that there will be multiple cities across the globe that potentially will reach day zero. Day zero is the point where they no longer have water to be able to provide to their citizens and the individuals who live there. And many of you may have read the stories about Cape Town, which almost reached day zero. There are plenty of other cities around the world, particularly in emerging markets, where this is a reality. So the business models we established sought to respond to this, and particularly to those who were least able to access service, so those who were underserved and who were unserved. So this is a slide from WASUP, which we used to use to kind of open the debate, but this is the rationale for why innovative business models are needed. So we've got about around 900 million people in slums as a result of climate change and also population growth, as I was mentioning. By 2050, water availability will be only 2/3 of what it was in 2015. So I'm going to talk you through a couple of models. The purpose of describing these is to help to understand what worked and didn't work. The first one I'm going to do is the one that didn't work quite so well. I have checked in with the various partners that we worked with, so they're comfortable for us to share the lessons. And I should say, in all of these examples, people worked extremely hard to seek to provide solutions, and there has been an element of success. But if we're being really stringent in terms of saying, did this business model reach scale? Was it able to reach the level and the number of people that require services? Then I think once I present it, you'll have a sense of that. Okay, so this is a container-based sanitation business model in Kumasi. To give you a sense of the context, obviously with sanitation, you normally have a set of human waste and you want to take it somewhere. So either it is taken by sewers to a central system, or like here in Cranfield, you have an on-site facility, which we just heard about, in which the waste is transported to that, and then it is processed and goes through a digester. So in this case, we were seeking to demonstrate that there was a different proposition in the market, that we could have a sanitation service that didn't have a holding facility. And in fact, it could be transported via a logistics business to then be safely managed and processed. So it was a whole new kind of concept that we were trying to deal with. If any of you have been to Glastonbury, how many of you have been to Glastonbury? Right, you would have experienced container-based sanitation because you go into the Portaloos and that's basically what it is. But the idea of this was to put it into people's homes, so the price point would be significantly lower. Therefore, you were able to extend services to the very poor. Right, so Kumasi, any of you traveled to Ghana ever in your lives? Oh, we've got one over there. Okay, so did you go to Kumasi? Yeah, okay, well. When you go back, you should definitely go. So Kumasi is the second city in Ghana, around 500,000 people, very important cultural heritage. Obviously, the Ashanti king, which you may be familiar with, is based there. And so there were really important reasons why it was sensible to create a business model there, but also because of the significant inequalities in the city and the number of poor people who did not have access to sanitation services. So either they would use public toilets, and I'll describe the limitations of those in a minute, or there would be open defecation, which obviously has a series of significant consequences environmentally and also health. And then in Ghana, part of the reason why we thought it was sensible to establish this business model was because many poor people in Ghana typically live in compound settings. So there would be a courtyard, there would be individual rooms all the way around it. And so 50, 60, 100 people would live in these settings. And it was an ideal location for a shared sanitation solution, but also ideal for a container-based sanitation solution, because typically you just need one single room where you could then place the toilet. So I should say, if you want clarification on any of these issues I'm describing, shoot your hand up. I'm very happy for you to interrupt me as I'm speaking. And I understand there's a lot of information around this. So, right, so this was the business model. So there's the toilet at the top. Basically, there's a container underneath it where the human waste is kept. It would be emptied something like once every 3 days. It would then be taken by a small truck to a central location where it was then collected, and then it would be taken to a facility where it would be processed, and there was a digester. So there was a whole system for ensuring that it was then safely managed and then safely processed. And the idea of creating this particular toilet was that we would be able to sell a service to the very poorest that would be something like $5 to $6. So it was a very competitive price point, $5 to $6 for a month for sanitation. So the competitor that we were working alongside were public toilets, which were large toilets that you would pay a very small amount of money, typically something like 10 to 15 cents for each visit. Obviously pretty unhygienic, fairly disgusting, to be honest. Lots of people lined up and then all using the toilet at the same time, no separation. And then there were, of course, issues of utilizing that at night. So security was quite often an issue. So the issues that we faced in terms of this were the price point that we were selling this at was, as I say, competitive. It also meant once the CapEx cost was covered, then from an OpEx perspective, the business would be profitable. So from the revenues coming in, and you look at cost of goods sold, then the gross margin was positive. We never managed to get the net margin positive, basically because of difficulties with the rest of this kind of system. We also had a series of challenges because consumers recognized that it was cheap, but basically they weren't really that interested in picking it up. That's essentially because we didn't understand the drivers for why they would then make a decision to buy this service. We thought originally that health would be the main driver, that it would improve their households. Unilever came in and worked alongside us, did market research, and actually we found that the three most important things for individuals was status, was security, and was no touch, which is effectively disgust. So it's kind of related to health, but it was a different issue. And one of the most important issues was people did not like and did not want to pay a monthly fee. For poor people, it was just way too much money to pay in one go. So if you think about going to the public toilet, then you could pay a small amount. And actually, from their perspective, the no touch was basically the same, because of course you have feces that are in this particular receptacle. So we went through multiple different iterations of trying to make it more hygienic and smell better. It was definitely better, but we never overcame that particular issue. And so what I wanted to emphasize was that this business received very significant international support. UK government, we raised money from investors in the UK and the US. There was a lot of buzz and a lot of interest around this. We used a lot of technology to try and make it work better. So this is an example of all of the houses had GPS locators on them, so that when the trucks would go round, that they would then identify the most sensible route. So because this is effectively a logistics business, that's the most expensive part of it. So all of this could be operationalized, and then the cost was brought down. That didn't change the fundamentals of the situation that I described. We also brought in experts from the US who helped in the sales process, which is essentially to deal with that, the questions, the drivers behind why people would buy the service. And they did an excellent job, and they definitely managed to drive up sales. And this was all about trying to get them to recognize the customer need. But again, it didn't fundamentally change the dial. So these are the sales figures from 2014. This was when the business was starting. I began as chief exec at WASSUP in 2014, and I was absolutely mandated by the board to get this moving. And we had an enormous amount of pressure to make it happen, and we did drive up sales quite significantly, but it didn't get to scale. And these are the sales today for the business. So it's still running and it's still doing stuff, but as you can see, it's nothing of particular significance. What I would say was that the fact that there was so much international attention and there was so much money coming internationally was actually a challenge, because the population in Kumasi could see that this was a business that was well run and well financed, and it had excellent vehicles and marketing, etc. And of course, there was therefore a dynamic of asking, well, why are we paying this price point? Why don't we get something that's potentially cheaper? And then other dynamics, particularly in the sanitation sector, where there would be, say, other providers who would then be providing significant subsidies, which happen in development programs. This means it builds up an expectation that potentially something should either be much cheaper or free. And so, as I say, I know the chief exec of the company. She's a wonderful person, but it just never was able to respond to the challenge that we set out. Right, so then second is then looking at a franchised latrine emptying service in Dhaka in Bangladesh. So this is a mega city, 20 million people, huge place. Anyone been to Dhaka? How did you do with the traffic? So when I took a bunch of investors, and I'll describe the investment moment we went through, but it was several years in, and I took them from the US, and we arranged to pick them up at 11:30 at night so that we could go around and then see all of this in action, basically to try and get them traffic. Essentially, by about 1 in the morning, we got to the point where it kind of eased off a bit so that we could actually do anything. But it did actually, for the investment, it worked out fine, because we all bonded, basically sitting in the back of this truck, kind of, because there was nothing else to do. But yeah, so vast place, lovely people, love Bangladesh, wonderful country. So population density is enormous. So central London is something like about 9,000 individuals. So this is 3 to 4 times that across the entire city. And one of the interesting aspects in terms of Bangladesh is that they've made significant strides, really impressive, in terms of dealing with open defecation, which of course was a major issue across various countries in Asia. So this means that the number of latrines and then septic tanks in the city rose exponentially, just at an enormous amount. But there was no business service, there was no sector to respond to those latrines or septic tanks. So what do you do with that in terms of emptying it? And typically what would happen if people didn't want to empty them, they would discharge then directly from the latrine or the septic tank straight out into the open environment, which is not good for the environment or sustainability. So this was a recognized opportunity that we felt was sensible to respond to. And also recent changes in regulation in Bangladesh meant that cities had responsibility for taking on on-site sanitation, so for effectively ensuring that those latrines were emptied. The cities really didn't have any capacity, didn't have any understanding of how to do this, so there was a real market opportunity to assist them to think about how they would do this well. So from the learning from the Ghana experience, we wanted to ensure that we were not seeking to stimulate a new business, but to work alongside existing Bangladeshi businesses and to persuade them to enter into this market that was traditionally seen as high risk, low margin, and then low status. And so the whole design of this business model was to try and work out how we could effectively do that. So this was through a thing called Sweep, which is effectively, it's a brand, but it's a franchise, and to And the positioning of the brand was to safely extract, transport, and dispose human waste in urban context in Bangladesh. So effectively to say to consumers, you can pay a price that is very competitive, your latrine or septic tank will be emptied and it will be safely managed. And you will be able to use this service again and again with certainty and with credibility. And we wanted to make sure that the business would be profitable, which was the drive to ensure that Bangladeshi businesses would engage with us, but also we would be able to serve the base of the pyramid, which is a real challenge in these particular contexts. So this is the reality of services to date. So this is a guy that's being lowered into a septic tank. So pretty revolting, pretty disgusting and unpleasant. So as I say, definitely seen as low status. Obviously, very significant health impacts for these individuals. And also dangerous. And this is the reason why, from a status perspective, people don't want to engage with this kind of work.
Why did he need to be lowered in?
Because in a latrine, you typically get the solid material at the bottom, and then you get kind of more liquid material at the top. So there's a necessity to break up the solid material at the bottom. So that's why he's doing that. I mean, he would go in and then come back out, but yeah, it's not a pleasant experience. No, that's fine. Very, very sensible. Right. So if you're then thinking about the sanitation market in Dhaka, so city of 20 million. At the time we were creating this, so this was 2016, 2017, something like that. This was the state of play. It'll be roughly the same today, although it's shifted as a result of the work that was done. So around 3% of fecal sludge was safely disposed of. So that means 97% is not. So 97% doesn't meet SDGs. So if you think about SDG 6, 3.4 billion people don't have access to safe sanitation. A lot of them would be sitting in here. So of that 97%, then you've got around 11% that is sewered. So it is transported safely, but it's not disposed of safely. Then you've got unsafe transport, which is basically leaky, not working sewers. And then you've got the main market here, which is effectively the latrines and septic tanks, of which the vast majority are just connected straight into surface drains. So it's about 70% of all the people. So, and you've got a small market here where this is rich people who can buy tankers, and then this is the unsafe chap that we just saw. And as I say, open defecation used to be a major issue, much less. So the market opportunity really to sell is of this something like 80% of the market. So it's enormous. Although of course initially we were targeting this 10% here, but then you have more possibilities as regulation then increases. So you then basically encourage people to empty their tanks rather than discharging straight into drains. And of course, creating the market is all about creating the conditions where people will then do this. So, of a city of 20 million, huge market opportunity. So Sweep was a mechanized emptying facility, which is provided by tanks. So, and this was a service that was provided by a Bangladeshi company. So it was a franchise. So we set out a tender. The first time we put out a tender in the city of Dhaka, it was extremely difficult. We persuaded the city that they had the responsibility for covering this, and they were willing to play ball with us, but only as long as they could see that there was an incentive that they would earn money from it. And I'll demonstrate how their contract provides that for them. But then persuading a Bangladeshi company that they wanted to take on this possibility was extremely difficult in the first time round. We did get a cleaning company who were called Gulshan Clean and Care to then provide that service. And really the turning point was when the entrepreneur realized that he would be able to make significant amounts of money from this. And that was really when it all kind of clicked. So the Gulshan Clean and Care functioned. Sorry, go ahead. Yes. Yeah, no. So well, the tendering requirement was to the local company. So the tender was put out by the city. I mean, we wrote it all effectively. We created the system, but the tender was between the local company called Jeffery Care and the city of Dakar. And then the city was effectively giving the license to the company to be able to provide services under their name, which was under the branded name. The company needed to pay money, so they paid a fee to be able to operate in that area. And then for the right to operate, then they were required to serve both low income and high income customers. And if they didn't do that, then their rights to operate would be removed. I'll be completely frank, it was kind of more flimsy in the initial stages, because of course there was no market and these things didn't operate. But we were trying to create a situation where this became the standard and the norm, and therefore everybody wanted to buy into it. And that's ultimately what happened. But the first time round was kind of tough. And the city were interested, one, because they had a responsibility to deal with this, but they didn't really know what to do. And two, because they would make money from this licensing fee. Yeah.
You mentioned that it was a cleaning company.
Yes.
But you also mentioned that a lot of the unsafe cleaning was already going on.
Sorry, when I meant cleaning company, I mean they go into offices and they cleaned offices. Yeah.
You mentioned that there was already a big business in unsafe emptying.
Yes.
Was it that the people already engaged in that work were just operating at such a low level that they weren't able to access the type of tender? There's almost some competition with people who are already doing that.
Yes, correct. So it is in competition, and the idea was to seek to ensure that you would offer a service that would be at the same price point but of a much higher quality. But then we clearly wanted to work on the issue of what do we do with all these individuals that potentially will lose their jobs, and that's why we worked with these companies to ensure that they offered employment possibilities to them. Yeah. I mean, technically, the manual emptying is illegal as a result of the regulations that came in, but still okay. So, from a practical point of view, if you're a consumer, then you hear about the service. So there was marketing in poor and rich areas. If you heard about it, you would call up. Your tanker would come and visit you, and then to the conversation that we were having, lots of the emptying would take place at night. Because again, this is a logistics business. If the truck is stuck in traffic, it costs a lot more money. So therefore, you want to ensure that it's as efficient as possible. And then it would be taken to certain sites that were designated again by the city. So, of course, to your question, you could only discharge in these designated sites in the city if you had won the tender and you had the license. So it was another way to try and control the standard of the service. So this really describes the relationship that I was just setting out. But essentially, so the sweet business, the city corporation provides the license to operate, the entrepreneur then pays the fee, and then within this system here, then the truck then serves both high income and low income customers. And eventually we wanted to move the model to the point where there would be a centralized company that would then be providing services for maintaining the trucks, so that then we would ensure the quality of the trucks. In the development that occurred in the first 4 to 5 years, we hadn't quite got to that point, but that was the theory. And then in terms of then the regulations in the contract, 30% of the work needed to be with low-income customers. The rest could be with high-income and institutional customers. But the differential price that was then paid by those customers meant that the service could be both profitable, but also offer a price point to low-income customers that was competitive with the manual emptiers, which was absolutely critical. Sorry, go on. Sorry. No, it wasn't. So in various markets, price is controlled, and in Bangladesh, for example, the price of water is controlled. But this was such a nascent market that actually there weren't controls set, but there were suggested price bands that were put into the contract we suggested those bans, and the city accepted those.
And is that based on your learnings from the previous city? Obviously, the price point to the consumer, right? The
Yes,
end price point to
yes. No, and no, it is absolutely. It's also based on, so when we started this up, the CapEx was then paid for as by investment. So from the OpEx model, as I'll show you in a minute, it was profitable. All of these businesses, and there were many more after the one in Gulftown Cleaner Care in Dakar, they all went profitable after about 9 months. We wanted to move the business model to the point where you could then take on debt over a long period of time. So then from a CapEx and OpEx perspective, it would be profitable. So that was the thinking. There had been various examples of this from other large development projects previously, where the infrastructure, so the CapEx, had been provided to companies, but there was no regulation around it. So then what you saw was, although they were intended to serve the low-income customers, basically they all went off and then sort of served rich people because they make lots more money.
Sorry, one more question. How did you determine which were the low-income customers, or was there like a?
So the city regulations that designate various areas of the city. So in Dakar, they're designated from 1 to 6. So they were certain areas that
area pays the low price, and then everyone.
Correct. Yeah. So it isn't a determination by the company. They don't say your house looks a bit rubbish. No, it was, and that was part of. We were working all the time to try and make the city feel that they were running this, because if you're going to embed it for the long haul, then that was critically important. And we also wanted Bangladeshi companies to see this as a real possibility. And so then you can see, so these were the price points. So the highest was institutional. That really means kind of schools, mosques, factories, etc. And then low income was about half of that. Obviously, from us, that doesn't feel like a significant price difference, but obviously for consumers in Dakar, it was. So, and then you can see from the profit, as I mentioned, all of the companies went profitable within a matter of months, and all of them within 9 months. We ended up with a series of companies that then did tender, so several all across different points in Dakar, several in areas outside Dakar, in Chattogram, in Rangpur, and then also in Barishal. And then to your point in terms of the city, the name Sweep became it was a recognized logo, and the government started talking about it as a success story. And once you get to that point, then of course, obviously more companies want to come. And we actually got to the point where we had competitive tenders. So companies were then vying to try and win that. And we had a whole series, so companies that dealt with medical waste from hospitals that then felt that they could move over into human waste. Other companies that had that were dealing with chemicals or transporting dangerous or difficult substances. And so there was a real kind of burgeoning of the whole system. So this is the data in terms of profitability. I think this is for the first 18 months from Gulftown Cleaner Care. So you can see, despite the work other points, the work level varying, then the profitability was pretty stable. So this gave us the confidence that we felt we could continue to expand. And then here is over the first 4 years. So this was the fairly significant expansion of the business. And this was the point new finance secured. So this was from a US investor, as I mentioned, who I was taking around Dakar, and we got something like 2.5 million to invest into the expansion. And ultimately the business got up to serving from a standing start up to 2.7 million customers across Bangladesh. So we had a radically different experience from the Ghana situation, but these were all Bangladeshi businesses, all run by Bangladeshi entrepreneurs, set within a Bangladeshi regulatory context. And obviously there was a necessity to try and assist them to think about how it would work, but that was absolutely fundamental in terms of this being successful. Okay, so I'm sure you can see from this, regulation played a critical role, and trying to build the regulation and the respect of the regulation was central. So I just want to say a few more words about the power of regulation and how we were able to use it in various other contexts. So there are many regulators that are in emerging markets. Often, actually, the regulations are pretty strong. They're pretty well written. The challenge comes from a whole series of cultural issues, political issues that are often not enforced. And then you can get particularly political interference that means that they aren't able to be applied as they ought to be. So building the capacity and the confidence of local regulators is essential. I think we have a scholar from Kenya here somewhere. No, it was online. Oh, you're all online. Sorry. Oh, 6 are online. Okay. Well, I have nothing but positive things to say about regulators in Kenya. They're excellent. They're hardworking. They care about what they do. They can be pretty tough. I've been shouted at by quite a lot of Kenyan regulators, but they really care about how these things work in their country, and that's absolutely what we need. And then, so we developed a very successful relationship with the water regulator in Kenya, WASREB, but then also went on to assist what was the regional regulator, so a whole series of regulators across East and Southern Africa, which is called ESOWAS. And the idea of that was to build standards so that they would all come up to a collective standard across the region. And this is absolutely essential in terms of building credible, durable, and then impactful standards. And it is the power of seeing a local or a regional regulator that believes that these standards needs to be put in place is incredibly important. So the impact of that practically, so this is to give you one more example, working alongside Nairobi Water. We had a long-term partnership, but one of the things that we worked very hard to do was to advance regulation. As I mentioned, this was in partnership with WASREB, and we created a specific pro-poor KPI, so a pro-poor regulation that sat at the national level that all the water utilities needed to respond to. And this was a piece of work between WASREB and WASREB, but the response to that was really remarkable. Now, I think you heard earlier today at the beginning of this session how important rankings are and how every human being in the world loves to be at the top of their ranking, whether it's cooking or whether it's design, or indeed whether it's Cranfield University being #2 in the world and something. So the dynamic was exactly the same. All of the utilities wanted to be at the top of the ranking, and they all put investment into putting services into poor areas, into informal settlements, so that they could move up the ranking in terms of this KPI. So there's 80 utilities across Kenya. 40 of them responded in the first couple of years. And this investment from Nairobi Water, which is the water utility in the capital, we worked alongside them, but it was really remarkable. In the informal settlements, which is about 1.83 million people across a city of around 4 million. So there was next to no water services in those areas. So there were informal suppliers, there were illegal suppliers, but there was no formal utility service. And we worked with them to establish a unit that was initially just 2 people who were working on this issue for 1.83 million people. By the end of the time we were working with them, this had moved from being a unit to a team, to then a department, to then a region. And a region meant it was its own standalone business unit alongside the rest, recognized that actually it was essential in terms of bringing in revenue for the utility. So it was critical for their bottom line and for their growth plans, serving over 400,000 customers in those informal settlements where previously there was none. And then we managed, or I should say the unit, the region, managed to then work successfully with the low-income clients who traditionally had a very poor view of the utility. So often they saw the utility as overpriced, and that vandalism and theft from the utility was entirely justified. I'm sure there are some interesting parallels with the UK context, but we won't go into that. And so the individuals in this region managed to successfully persuade the clients in informal areas that it made sense to pay for services. So that we completely turned around the situation, and all of this was backed by shifts and changes in the regulation. And the vision that these services and these consumers could support the growth of the utility and assist in terms of building their revenue was absolutely fundamental in terms of driving change. So then, final issue is that those business models that I just described and the expansion of services, they all require investment. And seeking to channel investment into these particular business models is extremely challenging. There are specific funds that do exist. I'm sure many of you have heard of impact investing as a concept. It's a very broad church of organizations, some of which are commercial, some of which are less commercial. And they do absolutely provide investment. But for these type of business models to prosper and to expand, there is a necessity to think about how finance can flow into them. And one of the greatest challenges, I was frequently approached by commercial lenders or by agencies working in commercial lenders, so the large banks that you would think of in the world, who wanted to expand their portfolios of investment. And I frequently presented to them possibilities, but generally none of them went forward because of creditworthiness of the business propositions. So either the entities or the public utilities, they just didn't meet international lender standards, or the ability of those particular bodies to absorb finances and then respond appropriately to financial institutions. So in the work that I do now, obviously meeting international lender standards is absolutely critical. And although it's laborious and it's complex, there is a reason for that, because it means that the lenders are certain, or at least they have a level of certainty that they're comfortable with, that they're managing their risk appropriately so that they can therefore invest. And building the capacity of local institutions or the local kind of businesses that I just described to be able to then access this kind of finance is critical. So at the moment, we're working on things like rail construction across East Africa. There's a very large rail construction in Tanzania and Uganda. It has a whole series of sections. They're each, multi-million-dollar investments, but they're all reaching these standards, and that is essential for ensuring that money is unlocked. So in my present work, these are the kind of asset classes that we're working on. So a lot of civic infrastructure, renewable energy, financial services, transport, etc. And just to help you understand, so these are typically the performance standards that we would ensure that financial investment reaches. We particularly work on 1, 3, and 6. So Lydia, I think you said that you were really interested in biodiversity. So this might be an area. My company is a B Corp, by the way. So all of that aligns. Yep. But essentially, this is all about risk management. So ensuring that the lenders are comfortable with the social and environmental risks, and they are comfortable to release the resources. And this is a standard that is used and widely recognized. And if any of you have heard of Equator principles, then these standards sit underneath those. And these are a plethora of other standards that we also work on. I won't go through all of them, but they give you a sense of how complex this world is. The main point that I really wanted to make here was there is a gap. There is an enormous gap between that middle-sized investment for those business propositions and opportunities that I was describing that really have significant impact in terms of responding to emerging market challenges, and then these large infrastructure projects. And there isn't a system to assist lenders or indeed to assist the potential borrower to then connect and ensure that you can make sure that risk is managed effectively. And having worked in both of those contexts, I think it's absolutely essential for the way forward in this. So to conclude, I think we saw from the initial example, so capital flows, whether that's seed funding or whether that's commercial investment, technical expertise, assistance in business acumen or design or marketing can all be helpful. And we saw that was helpful to the Ghanaian business, but it is not a guarantee for success. It definitely can assist in terms of thinking about how you would respond innovatively. And it was useful in the Bangladesh example, but it is not the absolute determinant. So assisting businesses, to reach international standards, as I mentioned, I think is essential. And the development of some kind of standards for the middle, I think would be hugely beneficial. Regulation assists in that, absolutely. And the power and the ability of local regulators to ensure that regulations are enforced effectively is a huge determinant of success. But fundamentally, the role of entrepreneurs in these particular settings is absolutely critical in terms of making things work. So without those entrepreneurs in the Bangladesh example, it just would not have worked. Without those individuals who were working in Nairobi Water who absolutely cared about delivering services to informal settlements, it wouldn't have worked. So all of you who are from those markets, whether you're here or online, I hope that part of your future might be responding to these issues and building these kind of solutions. And I just want you to remember that you are absolutely central to making this work. So thank you. That was a little of my experience.
So time for your questions, but I'm just going to slip a quick one in from the online audience because it's from someone, I don't know your name, sorry, that worked for Jeffery in the UK, asking what would you say are the key enablers that government departments can provide to support sustainability in fast-growing cities? I think you've touched on some of them, but if you from a more UK perspective, and what are the main challenges you've observed when working with local or central governments and implementing sustainable infrastructure and services in fast-growing cities? So what can governments do better to enable, and what are the key challenges you've seen?
So better to enable, so one, stable funding. It might not be from them, but help to create an environment in which funds are possible. Longer term funding and more secured and at more competitive rates. And then two, make sure that regulation is supportive and constructive, but also does not change over time to facilitate those businesses.
And anything, I mean, also in the UK infrastructure, is there something about the link to entrepreneurs as well? That seems to be quite a magic ingredient in the context you're talking about.
Yes, I would agree in the United Kingdom, absolutely.
I don't think that's often something that people connect with when they're thinking about infrastructure and services, because that seems so much more macro thing.
Yes.
But I think that's an interesting point.
I mean, I think in these contexts, you can absolutely see the innovation at play because it's it's so complicated and changing and shifting. Innovation, I think, is absolutely critical in the UK, but it's potentially less visible in the infrastructure sector. Yes.
Yeah. Over to the room. If anyone else online has got some questions, do pop them in and I'll try and pick them up in a minute. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
A question for you. In your Bangladesh example, on the graphic, you've got 11,000 tons of waste taken away, growing to something 30,000.
Yeah.
What percentage of that was that of the total?
That was minuscule.
Still below 10%.
Oh yeah. And 1 or 2%. Yeah.
Given the differences in the population size, and the infrastructure, if you were doing the Ghana project again and you kind of had a blank slate, would you try and implement the same model, or are there other kind of lessons and you try it in a different way?
Well, one, I think the role of local entrepreneurs would be much more central and much more visible in terms of the front of the business. You could have had the same level of investment, but it was at times that business felt like a development project because it was so visibly international. And then I think there was a really fundamental question about whether container-based sanitation would work, because you can build latrines and septic tanks, which is a container, but it's below ground and therefore capped off. There was a fundamental issue with effectively waste sitting in somebody's house for a number of days, and we never got over that. So the reason why that was used was because you wanted a service that was cheap. I think therefore you need to ask a different question, which is we need to have a level of infrastructure. How can we create a system by which that would be? And actually shared sanitation, but with a latrine, is quite a reasonable solution if individuals are willing to engage with it. So if you imagine that you've got 30, 40 individuals who are using one particular unit, then clearly the price point for each individual is brought down.
I'm gonna ask you to use the microphone because I don't.
Or I can project. Is that coming to me or?
Yes, it's coming to you.
Am I doing it out?
No, it doesn't pick up online,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Hello.
Hello.
It's a question about the value chain.
Yes,
So fecal sludge is interesting because there are valuable products that can be made out of it
correct.
that can increase profits along the chain.
Yeah.
We didn't see that in your examples. Is that because it just doesn't add enough to the level of investment that you have to put in, or it just wasn't relevant in these contexts?
So you're absolutely right, and we also worked on that. But I was trying to keep the kind of the talk within parameters. I sadly went over the time, so but yes, so we also worked on all of that, and you are completely correct. So if it's on-site sanitation, if you've got a biodigester, then typically you will have a set of standard products. If it's anaerobic digester, then you'll normally have methane, and you'll normally have some type of fertilizer. So it'll be some type of nitrate. So that was useful. The issue with the methane is it's very difficult to transport it. So actually to monetize it, that's quite challenging. There were successful examples, and we did this in various cities in Africa, where you could sell the methane on site. But typically if there was a school or a cooking facility or a community facility, they would buy it. But if you think about the marketing, then actually you don't get a maximum price point for that. In terms of fertilizer, then also in Bangladesh, actually they sold on some of the waste as fertilizer. Again, regulation is essential because it depends on the particular regulations in the market. And if something is designated as a fertilizer, you can achieve a much higher price point. We sought to do that in a number of markets, but often you had to sell it as a kind of soil enhancer, which you could get money for, but it was significantly lower. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm not very good at this.
You've given examples of how important regulation is
Yeah.
in driving, it becomes the catalyst.
Yeah.
You also have mentioned that you've worked on regulations across several markets across the continent as well. Again, like catalyzing that change even further. You have also mentioned working with Unilever. Bearing in mind that corporate affairs is a very, very difficult thing to achieve, especially on such a large scale. Partnering with Unilever, partnering with others, was that catalyzing further, or is that inhibiting being partnered with big FMCG like Unilever?
No. So WASSUP is a company limited by guarantee. It was set up by various entities, including private sector companies, various universities, and a number of charities. They all were effectively, they were guarantors of the business. Unilever was one of those, Cranfield also one of those, Borealis, which is a major pipe manufacturer, Meta, even bigger pipes. WaterAid was involved in that, and so they all brought expertise from different areas. So there was an inherent partnership as a result of that. Typically, in terms of Unilever, the work was to assist. I mean, they were assisting us, but we were assisting them to understand how they could market their products and how they could have different channels to market for their products for low-income population. So if water services were being created, so for example, in the Nairobi setting, you didn't have water services, and they would either be pipe to house, or they would be yard pipe, or they would be a central station where you would go and fill up your jerry cans. In all of those settings, then you could market soap or washing powder, etc. And then there was a benefit to the consumers because they would have access to that, but also then for Unilever, their products could get there. And there was a whole issue about how you would market those things appropriately, so size, packaging, etc. But no, I mean, in general, the relationship with Unilever was excellent. They were extremely supportive of that first example. They wanted it to scale much faster than they did, which all of us did. And then ultimately, they pulled back quite correctly because it wasn't achieving the results that everybody wanted.
Thank you. I think we've probably got time for 2 more questions. Over to you.
Hello, I noticed that the rate of growth and the users stopped at 2021, May 2021. So what's been the position between then and now? At what rate has it grown, or what's the current picture?
Yeah, so I used all the old slides I used to use. I left WhatsApp in 2022 as chief exec, so that's why it stops there. And then also we got major investment. Clearly, COVID came along. It was 2020 and 2021 were challenging, but the rate of growth has continued, and they've continued to add further companies across those cities that I described.
Just to expand on that as well, the reason for asking is that what has sort of added into the pot of the growth? Has it been that more people have become aware of it, or more trust in it, or is it that just the collaboration of it becoming a bigger known about scenario, just that kind of understanding as to what's helped that growth over the last few years?
So customers are happy with the service. It's at a price point that they used to pay for manual emptying, and now they're getting mechanical emptying. So it's for them, it's a better, more secure service. Entrepreneurs wanted to engage with the franchise business, they were making money, and pretty decent money. And then from the government perspective, particularly the city perspective, they came to recognise that they had a responsibility to ensure these services were functioning. As I mentioned, they really they struggled to understand what that would be, and Sweep really became a well-recognised kind of package which they could then pick up. And so more and more cities then said, okay, yep, that's a solution, we'll go for it. And it was then a revenue source for them in terms of that. So those were the main drivers really for the success.
Thank you very much. 1 more, and then we'll close. I'll come down here to you. You okay, Neil, to do 1 more?
Yeah, no, of course. I don't want to keep.
Thank you. You talked about the challenges sort of retrofitting into infrastructures that were sort of creaking a little bit.
Yep.
Would there be any parallels to, say, the UK infrastructure that seems to be creaking a little bit underwater?
Well, it's not. I mean, I agree with you. The UK infrastructure is creaking a little bit, but this is typically you were dealing with areas that were unplanned. So people came in, they would set up structures, which is completely understandable. They wanted somewhere to live. And there would be ad hoc services. So that would be electricity that would be taken off the main supply and run down. There might be a guy that would then go around in a truck and sell water, etc. So, and then people would make ad hoc roads, but they would be of poor quality. So it was definitely creaking, but that's because it wasn't. I think in the UK context, we have infrastructure that's relatively old, or at least hasn't been kept up in the way that it ought to have been. So it's a slightly different challenge in that respect.
One more. Can you pass that back? Now we must let Neil go.
Hi, thank you so much for, I think, highlighting some of the issues we have in emerging countries. So my question is, there's a lot of innovation that happens. People have great ideas. How do we manage change that's very in a sustainable way? And I think also something that needs to come to light is a little bit about the geopolitics around why things are thwarted. A good idea isn't put in place, maybe because it doesn't serve the interests of the people in power.
Yeah. No, so you've absolutely hit the nail on the head, and this is a whole topic in itself, and you could do an hour-long presentation on this, but let me try and summarize. So there are lots of opportunities and initial funds for people to start to develop their ideas, and I completely agree with you. An enormous amount of innovation, young population, very dynamic, really going places. Those funds only allow those ideas to go to a certain point, which was the point I was making at the end of the presentation. So if you're thinking about scale and you want to go to, you know, I'm very proud of the millions that we managed to serve, but to be honest, we wanted to be at tens of millions or hundreds of millions. If you want to then go to a much larger scale, you need different types of investment, and getting these business models and these ideas to transfer into a much more formalized context where you can get large access to much larger amounts of capital is really problematic. And I think that's one of the challenges that we need to build.
Thank you very much, Neil. I hope you agree that was a really fascinating insight to a sector that we probably don't consider every day, in a context that we don't necessarily consider every day. But interesting that there's common themes with a lot of sustainability issues that we tackle in terms of that interface between entrepreneurism, innovation, regulation, but also customer behaviour and perception. But the story of success really showing what can happen if there's coordination between those different parts of society in the way that we'll be looking at when we play the game tomorrow, and that all their interests are met.
Yes, correct.
So that everybody kind of wins in their own way in those solutions. But I think a lot to think about there, and thank you so much for sharing frankly in terms of what the success stories were and what the struggles with the other projects. It's been so interesting. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions, everyone. And that's the end of today formally, but do stay for if there's any pizza left or a few more drinks if you've got time to stay afterwards. Thank you very much for coming. See you again soon.